listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
Welcome to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. I'm your host, Dave Ross, alongside our general manager here at VSiN, Mark Dominik, former GM of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Mark, this is kind of fun because you get down to this part of the season, and like the glass half full, glass half empty. Half full, we got the best games to go. Half empty, we only get 4 games this week, 2 next week, and then 1 more, and then it's on to the off season. So we got to savor the ones that we have here, I guess, for the next week or next month or so through the Super Bowl. How do you look at that as a GM? Like, obviously, these are the games you want to be in, but also if you're not in these, you're already kind of looking ahead to 2025, right?
Well, you're deep into 2025 at this point. You're right. And these games are great. And I think what we've got is we've got little micro Super Bowls this week, next week, before we actually get to the Super Bowl, because we've got such good games and such good matchups, both in the AFC and the NFC. But yeah, if you're one of the teams on the outside now, you're one of the 24 teams that, have been either eliminated or were never in it. You are deep into preparation. East-West Shrine is right around the corner. Senior Bowl is a little bit further away. You want to kind of have a draft meeting before you go to those events, because you want to kind of get the board preset of what it looks like before the All-Star games impact some decisions, or who do you really want to focus at the All-Star. So you're deep into draft meetings, and you're also starting your free agency meetings this soon, even though free agency is off in March, starting to really self-evaluate. So your pro department, to me right now, should be evaluating your football team and putting in their final reports of what did the whole season look like for player X, Y, Z. What did they finish on a high, finish on the same, finish on a low? Where does he rank on the team? Do you categorize this guy as, we can live with them, but we're not winning because of him? Or is he more of the guy like, hey, we're winning because of this player, or we need to replace this player? Like, we got to find somebody that we think could be more impactful. So you should be getting that from your pro department. At the same point, your coaches are supposed to fill out their end of season reports on all their players. So you can kind of have a meeting with your head coach and yourself and kind of look at the overall picture of what does your team look like right now, and what are the things we're talking to ownership about, like we're going to complete or we're going to fix or finish. You start to work on that actually as a GM during the season, but now you're working with your head coach to make sure everybody's on the same page of like, here are the top 5, top 10, top 15 things we really need to find better competition for, or we've got a lot of weakness in that area. But you're doing a lot of that while, again, your scouts should be in-house. For the most part, I have a feeling most, college scouts are in-house right now, and they're probably doing preliminary draft meetings again to set your first board. Really, you might do it a little in December, but now that we got, the underclassmen are, basically declaring, we still have more declaring every day. You want to kind of get those guys on a board somewhere, so at least you're kind of walking into this offseason, especially these All-Star games, being prepared for what you're seeing.
Yeah, we saw like Quinn Ewers from Texas, right? He declares for the draft. That's going to move around some draft boards here. I don't know that Baltimore and Buffalo will be in the market for Quinn Ewers or a quarterback anywhere in the draft. And let's start right there as we break down these 4 games today in the GM Shuffle, Mark. It is kind of bizarre to think, as we discussed this here on Thursday, that come Monday, one of these teams are going to do exactly what you just broke down. They're going to be doing all that process of like, okay, we can't be upset. We can't be sad. Yeah, we can be sad and upset, but now we got to turn to the business of work because our season is over. This doesn't seem like it's going to actually happen, but it's going to happen for Buffalo or Baltimore here Sunday night, the marquee game of the weekend. Zay Flowers did not practice as well. Now, that is different, right? Like if you don't practice a couple days during the week in the regular season, it really could signal that you're not going to play. But in the postseason, do you switch those rules, Mark, and say, we don't care about the practice. We need you in the game. And if you can go in the game, practice be damned, you're suiting up Sunday night if you're good to go.
Well, as we're sitting here Thursday, I have a feeling they have a very good sense if Zay is going or not at this point. I don't know if it goes all the way up to a game time decision kind of situation, but you don't need to push him out there. There's no reason to be part of the practice. You're just trying to get him to the game, to your point. I mean, that's the overall goal for Zay Flowers, to be able to be out there and be the impact player that he can be as a Pro Bowl player that he is. But I think they probably have a very good sense of it now, but I wouldn't put him on the field either. I would risk nothing in this situation because there's really nothing to gain. I don't need to see Zay Flowers run around and catch balls right now. Make sure that he's getting back to 100%. And even if he can't play this weekend, you're still getting him ready to hopefully play the next weekend, because you're going to walk into this game assuming you win the game. There's no reason why you wouldn't think that. So for that kind of situation, Buffalo fans, I'm sure, I hope he doesn't go. Baltimore fans are, I hope he does. Purist in me says, put him out there. Let's let the best team win because this is such a great heavyweight matchup. Again, this is my micro Super Bowl of this weekend. If these two teams were actually allowed and eligible to be in the Super Bowl, neither one would surprise me whatsoever. Is that disrespecting Detroit or is it disrespecting Kansas City? Yeah, maybe a little. But the reality is they've played so good down the stretch. It's a shame that we have to see one of them get knocked out. But that's life in the postseason, and that's life in the National Football League. And, I think we all kind of saw this was coming down the pipe as we watched Kansas City just continue to pull win after win after win, that they're going to get that 1 seed, and one of these juggernauts aren't going to get there. So huge game this weekend. Weather, we'll see. Both have played in tough weather conditions before. Both know what cold feels like. Both know what rain, sleet feels like. This is a hard game to judge because, as you know, I think you know, but my daughter's part of the Bills Mafia. And when Avery's like, I don't have, sorry, Ravens fans, I don't have a Ravens fan in my house of the 5 of us. Not that we dislike the Ravens, but, when you got a member of the Bills Mafia, you're hearing about it every day at home. So, there's an inkling that I might be getting a little bit biased in my opinion of who I think is going to win this game.
She didn't jump through a table to become part of Bill's Mafia, did she? I hope she didn't do that ritual.
No, she's only 13. I'm not going to let her do that. She's got too much. There's a lacrosse and a volleyball coming around the corner. I'm not going to let her risk that.
Smart man. It is interesting when you look at, I don't know how you split between Allen and Lamar. People can debate it. They're going to debate it. One of those guys is going to win MVP. I think we're assured of that. What we're not assured of is that either one of these guys will make their first Super Bowl appearance. That had both been an AFC title game. And they both lost that AFC title game. Came last year for Lamar. It's bizarre because you go back, the Bills haven't even got to the title game the last couple of years. It's been 3 years now since they lost to the Chiefs in that title game. Is there more pressure on one of these quarterbacks to get that hurdle and not just get into the AFC title game because the winner's going to get to that game, or really even a step ahead to say, now those questions about can I win the big one? If I win this one, it's still not the big one, but is there pressure on these guys? Do they feel that sort of thing?
I think they have to a little bit. Don't you feel like Buffalo for a little bit has to feel a little bit more pressure than I think even the Ravens feel? Ravens, like you said, had a nice run, but Buffalo has had a disappointing out in the last 3 straight years, and unexpected maybe or maybe not, but they still lost. And so I think even collectively, not just the quarterback, but the team, there's a lot of players that have been around together for the last few years and they felt it together. And so I think that's the unique thing here is that I think there's a little more pressure. I think that's what's helpful for the game to be at Buffalo. Even when you look at the game last week against the Denver Broncos, Denver come out like 7-0. What's going on? But, they got under control. Buffalo fans showed up, screamed. They put, back-to-back drives together, and they took control in the second half. I think that's exactly what they need, and I think that's the huge difference here in this game is at least it's in Buffalo where you can have the momentum behind your back if you need it or have the encouragement behind the back if you're falling behind. But I think if you ask me which team's more stressed about it, I think you have to say that the Buffalo Bills are carrying a little more baggage just because it's been kind of difficult outs over the last couple of years.
We've seen some, I guess, addition by subtraction. Stephon Diggs, they kind of let him go to Houston in the offseason. Everybody went, oh, my goodness, what's this team going to look like without Stephon Diggs? It looked pretty darn good, right? Then we saw Deion Johnson and kind of his trials and tribulations throughout the year and hops on with the Texans. They win a game last week. He's pouting in the locker room. They cut him before they can even get to their game against the Chiefs on Saturday. And then the Ravens picked him up. So, Mark, from a front office perspective, a team he's already been with and kind of they let him go once, they're potentially down Zay Flowers, but they can't activate him. They won't get him technically until after the Super Bowl. So it doesn't help them in the short term. As a GM, is that a chess and checkers thing that's going on here with Deion Johnson? Why would the Ravens go back there if they can't even utilize them potentially until next year?
Yeah, I think it's more of just like, looking at the roster, looking at what they know about him, having him be in their culture, their building, that they feel like maybe they can get the best out of him. I'm sure that it was, I'm not sure, but I would think there might have been a conversation with the agent to kind of like, where's his mind? What's he thinking? Would he want to be here? Is he be part of the offseason program and kind of be part of the team in 2025? And I think if you're him, the player, I said, yeah, I want to be part of that Ravens team. I want to be part of the Derrick Henry, Lamar and everything, Lamar Jackson, certainly Zay Flowers, etc. And so, this is just more of like, as a GM, you're not just thinking about how do we win this playoff game. Your also brain is like, what's 2025 look like? 26 looks like, 27 look like. And so this is Eric DeCosta, the general manager, thinking about 2025 while we're in the middle of the playoffs of 2024. That's what good general managers do. Every general manager is probably thinking through it, but Eric pulled the trigger and said, look, I know enough about the player that we're going to move to make our roster as good as we can, even now, even though we can't be an impact player for us when we have a playoff game in a couple of days. So, I salute the aggressive move, and the downside is so minimal that I understand it.
I got to see if I have all the stops proper. We saw that Mike Tomlin dealt him away, right? Get out of here. We'll move you from Pittsburgh to Carolina. Then Carolina cuts him loose. You're not welcome here. Ravens pick him up. That doesn't work out. They let him go. And then the Texans pick him up, and then the Texans let him go. And now he's back in Baltimore. I mean, one, you got to be talented in order for people to put up with that type of headache, a perceived headache out there. But two, how many more lives, Mark, do you get? Talent can only take you so far. So at some point, you're right, Deontay Johnson, where's his head at, right? At some point, we got to figure out if this guy wants to be on a roster past a couple weeks before he goes onto another team.
Yeah, I mean, I think you do, right? This is another classic tale of the Steelers receiver that just everything started to fall apart. And you're like, what happened to this guy's career? And why? Because it all started going in the right direction at the right time. So, the good news, I think, for Deontay, and I think what was important, and I think, again, that's hopefully why this came together, is to go to another team and not a team that already had you is kind of a little bit more encouraging for maybe Deontay, and it's a little bit better of a optic for the player, like long-term optic for the player, because he's going back to a club that had him and said, no, I'm going to move on. And so in that situation, I think it's better for the player. And I think that was a very strategic move by the agent, and probably a little bit of a coming to Jesus conversation about like, hey, look, if you don't get this right, you're in deep trouble.
Yeah. So he will not be on the roster, not just for this game against the Bills, but he won't be on the roster in the entire postseason, but they will have his services next year. All right, when we come back, we'll go to the other AFC games, some injuries to discuss there as well. That's next. We'll break down the Texans and the Chiefs right here on the GM Show.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
We are back on the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Dave Ross alongside Mark Dominik, and Mark, the other AFC game to break down here. I don't know that a lot of people give the Texans a real shot to go to Arrowhead and pull off, not by the odds makers, but it would be the biggest upset, obviously, in the AFC, with that Bills and Ravens game basically being a toss-up. 8-point underdogs. I think we all can understand why they're a touchdown and a 2-point conversion away from being even in the odds makers' eyes. When I see that Joe Mixon is on the injury report here for the Texans, like if there's one team out there that can't lose a stud running back at this stage, you would think it would be the Texans going into Arrowhead. How significant is that? Or is that really, okay, he's on the injury report, don't worry about it. He's going to be there, and Joe Mixon's going to give you everything Joe Mixon's got come Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's significant because that means that Joe Mixon probably can't get to the game at 100%. And yeah, I get it. Like, we're in the postseason. Like, not a lot of players are really, truly 100% whatsoever. But maybe Joe Mixon's more like 80%, the 90% he would be without this little ankle injury. It also adds fuel to, stopping the run and having the Chiefs be more fired up. Making sure that when you tackle Joe Mixon, you give him a little extra love at the end of that pile, right? That kind of mindset that you have is like, how do we limit one of the important weapons that they have in terms of controlling the clock and controlling time of possession and controlling the possessions that the Chiefs get to have? Because that's really what this game is about. Is I don't want Patrick Mahomes to have the ball 11 or 12 times. I want him to have it 8 or 9 times. If I can do this game right, we don't let this thing become a shootout. We let this thing play tight. And we try to stay in this game where it's 21-17 in that realm where it's like, hey, we're within it. And I think the Texans are good enough defensively, but I think they can keep this game closer than I think people think. I don't think that the Texans are just like, it doesn't feel like, when we watch the Buffalo-Denver game, you're like, this is interesting, but I feel like Buffalo's going to pull away, and then suddenly Buffalo does and just kind of really pulls away, and you're like, okay, it's 31-7, it is what it is. I just don't feel that in this game. I feel like this game is going to be better defensively, and it's going to be much more of a smash-mouth, tough, physical game. that, I think that the score is going to be a little bit lower. And I think the Houston Texans stay within a score and have a chance with the ball in the fourth quarter to be like, you could take the lead here. That's the way this game feels, because I just think the Texans feel like there's something still there to prove, even though what they've done the last 2 years has been so impressive to win the South, win a playoff game, put themselves in the Final Four in the AFC 2 years in a row. That's so much harder than people realize. And so, I'm excited about this game. I don't look at this game as like, okay, that's the throwaway game. This is the one that's not going to be interesting to watch. I think it's going to be a much better game than people think.
We know that Mecole Hardman is going to return from the IR for the Chiefs as well. And again, it's just another weapon to add to this smorgasbord of weapons that are getting healthier for the Chiefs, right? It looks like you're going to get Pacheco back here to be able to pound that rock a little bit. And we know about the additions. Obviously Hopkins coming over during the year. You still have Kelsey. Feels like he might be at one of the healthiest points of his season so far. Like, is this going to be the best version of the Chiefs offense that we've seen? Because I feel like we've always had, as the weeks have gone on, they've been underwhelming. They've been winning, but not in the way that the old Chiefs, when the Tyreek Hill Chiefs, when they're going to beat you with over the top, everything's 30-plus points. That's not this Chiefs, but could it look closer to that with all these added weapons?
Yeah, I mean, you think what Andy Reid wants to do is push you vertically. You got a couple guys that can push you vertically. That's a great situation to be in. I mean, if they had Rice, this team would be really set up to be like, wow, okay, be careful. This is a lot more scary, because there's so many options Patrick has. And so it's really kind of Andy Reid dialing up, what does he want in certain situations? Who does he want to get the ball to? Because that's what this offense does, right? It purposely sets up players to be in position to make a play, and Patrick runs through the progressions and throws it to the guy that's, as he watches and reads the defense, what they're going to give him. So, I think this is good news for the Chiefs. I think you're going to see some vertical push down the field. I'm trying to, make the DBs exhausted. I want to keep, the nice thing we have, Hardman, is that you've got a chance now to put Worthy out there vertical, Hardman vertical. Now Hopkins comes underneath, and like that corner's like over there, breathing fumes, and you're like, okay, now go tackle, DeAndre. It's a nice thing to do to kind of just completely rotate those guys through, to just keep spreading the ball, push the ball down the field. It opens up the screen game that Andy Reid loves so much, and it also opens up Kelsey in the middle. So all those things are good that he's coming there. It's a good news for Kansas City Chiefs in the offense, because you're right. The best news is it feels like at this point, besides Rice being out, and I know that they missed Jalen, their corner, that would be another one that would be nice to have in lost early in the season. But, they're fairly healthy. And I think that's what's really good about this entire playoff venue, is that all 8 of these teams feel like they haven't really lost him in the last couple of weeks. Sure, Detroit's got players down, but in the last couple of weeks, as it really matters, the good news is most of these teams are staying pretty healthy.
So we always talk about like Andy Reid. What I love about Andy Reid is it's not just an overseer head coach. It's calling the offense. He's in charge of the offense, right? Like I always say, Marco, what do you do? What do you do as a head coach? I think on the other side, we forget about D'Amico Ryans. I know you don't, but I think people out there in Gen Pop, as I like to say, I think they forget this was a guy that was the D coordinator in San Francisco. That's how he got this job in Houston. And then I look at the defensive job they did a week ago against the Chargers, and you turn Justin Herbert over 4 times when he had 3 picks in the entire season. Are people forgetting that D'Amico Ryans is not an overseer? He's running that defense, and they're doing a pretty darn good job of it.
Yeah, and they did a good job in San Francisco with good talent, and they've got pretty good talent now in Houston with the Texans. And yeah, I mean, I think it's harder to do that. I think it's harder to be a head coach that calls defense and be a head coach than it is being an offensive coordinator calling the game and then also being the head coach, because I think the offensive coordinators feeling momentum, feeling different things. And like, as a head coach, you're like, we're going to go for it here on 4th down, or, they can really focus on the defense. Like, listening to the calls of like, what are you trying to be in when it's 3rd and 13? Like, what are we trying to prevent here? And where the defensive coach is like, well, it depends kind of on the next play. Are we calling it a defensive play or not? So to me, it's harder to be what D'Amico Ryans is doing, yet he's doing a great job of it. And again, he's been doing that. Gosh, since he was a player, he was calling defense, right? I mean, this guy's been a great football player, and then turns around, becomes a great coach, and now a great head coach. D'Amico's been around for a while. This is really fun to watch him, and you get a chance to sit down and talk to him and what he's about and just who he is as a person. Not a big surprise that he's in the position he is, and not a big surprise that the team follows him and listens to him, because as the most important thing you can be as a coach is that everyone in that room with you thinks they're getting better. That is the most important thing, whether that's a position coach, a coordinator, or the head coach. And I got to think all 53 guys that are on that 53-man roster, also the practice squad, are when D'Amico Ryans comes up in front of them, they feel like he's there. He's going to give them a nugget to make them better. And that's why I think they're playing such good football. And they've been able to play good football since he's been there.
What I'm so intrigued by is, look, we get it. The Chiefs have the advantage because if you got 15, you got Patrick Mahomes, you're going to have the advantage about everybody, right? We understand that. But when you look at Bobby Slowick going up against Steve Spagnuolo, and then you look at D'Amico Ryans against Andy Reid, I don't want to say it's the young against the old, but you do have the established guys that have been there, done that, won multiple rings against two guys in Slowick and D'Amico that are like, and we're knocking on the door, right? How does that chess match work with that kind of newer way of thinking versus the established but proven winner way of thinking?
Yeah, say old versus young. It's fine. I think you're saying that because, I think that both the Spags and Andy are like, well, we're not spring chickens anymore, even though, the amount of experience, the amount of calls, the amount of snaps, the amount of practices, the amount of plays they've been around. I mean, you think about like Andy Reid and like they come back to Mike Holmgren. Like, you remember he was just a coach under Mike Holmgren. I mean, the amount of football he's digested and done and handled is astronomical. And Spags too, when you think all the way back to the Giants years of him being a coordinator, his head coach years, these guys have seen so much ball. Is it an advantage? Somewhat. I mean, this comes down to the whole staff, right? How good's your quality control coaches? How good are your advanced scouts? How good are the people that are trying to get the players right? They're positional coaches. Yes, does experience matter? Sure, it helps. But then again, you got to remember, Andy Reid got his first couple of years, his first situation. I think that it's kind of the same. You got to give edge to experience. It's important. But it's also important, like, how's the whole team working together to break down the tape? How's the whole defensive staff coming together to really look at Patrick Mahomes and figure out how do we keep him off kilter a little bit or even a little bit more so he doesn't make some miraculous throw or some off-balance crazy whip down the field. But I don't think it's a big enough impact where I sit there and say, again, I may be here next week and be like, yeah, Houston lost by 21 and I saw that, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to come on here and act like I saw that coming. I just think this is going to be a better game because I think the Houston defense is a little underrated on the big screen of the National Football League. And I think that's something that, sometimes we don't talk enough about because it's easy to talk about offense. It's easy about high scoring, push the ball down the field, all this stuff. But, maybe it's still fundamentally in me that, offenses get you to the playoffs. Defenses can help you win a championship.
That's why, again, I'll get off my soapbox. That's why guys like Pete Carroll, to me, like if Jimmy Johnson wanted to come out of the booth tomorrow, like those guys have forgotten more football than most people will ever know. I don't buy the game passes them by mantra. I really don't. I just think if you know it, it doesn't ever leave you. To that point, Mark, if you're a GM again and you're hiring your next head coach, do you want a quote unquote overseer? Because Jimmy, back in those Dallas days, was an overseer and he had great assistants around him. Or do you want, a guy that, like, if I'm hiring you as a head coach, I know you're taking care of this side of the ball. Like, I know you're going to be either running the defense or you're running the offense. Do you want an overseer or do you want a guy that's going to take away one side and you don't have to worry about that side of the field?
Well, it really depends. Like, I still am surprised how few special teams coordinators have been head coaches in the National Football League because they really understand how to build a roster. They have to deal with well, he's not a starter, but, he's going to play for you, or he has to understand. And they're really good at personnel. I think a lot of special teams coordinators are really good at personnel because they're looking at the athlete. They're looking at the position. They've got to figure out, how do I make this punt team as good as it can be? How do I make sure we don't get a block? Who's the gunners? All those different things. So this is one of the things where I don't mind an overseer, but I'm surprised that we just haven't seen another guy, especially with the success that Harbaugh's brought and be able to show in the National Football League. It's really one of the things I think is most surprising. Would you like, if it's a younger coach, would I like to have a veteran coach on the other side of the ball to kind of like take that stress off the table? Yeah, I think you would. I think that's just kind of logical. Do I mind if I have a head coach in there that's been a head coach that's an older guy that's going to be like just kind of sitting around the building, but also kind of helping maybe the head coach through his patterns? I like that a little bit too. I don't think I really have a preference. I do think it is hard if you go with a young head coach and a young coordinator on the other side. I think that becomes a really difficult thing because I think it's a lot for a new head coach to have to manage.
Absolutely fascinating. And yeah, we're seeing in Philadelphia, it works with the overseer and then the young and the old as coordinators. NFC talk next here on the GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
We are back at the GM Shuffle. Dave Ross alongside Mark Dominik, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Mark, let's get to the NFC side of the ball here. I kind of love the theme of look at these head coaches and these teams and how they operate, right? So you got Dan Quinn in year one in Washington, D.C., running that defense. And then you got Dan Campbell, and he's got those coordinators we're kind of referring to, right? Where he's got Aaron Glenn is running that defense, and certainly everybody wants Ben Johnson as the offensive coordinator. I don't know if he's going to have those coordinators this time next year. But when you look at that in the structure systems here in Detroit and Washington, they're very different, but they're getting success in different ways. What do you make of the job of Dan Quinn in year one with 13 wins already and trying to get number 14, which would get him to an NFC title game in year number one?
Yeah, I think that Coach Campbell or Dan Quinn, I think to start with that, what he's been able to do, I think it was like we talked about. You know, you've got a really strong guy that's been a head coach before in Cliff Kingsbury, and I think that really helps the whole situation because you've got a very good comfort, a guy that understands the stress and the pressures that are under the head coach, but now has a chance to just focus back on what got him the head coaching job in the first place. And then they got the quarterback they wanted. The quarterback I think they desperately wanted to make sure they got in Jaden Daniels, and the impact I think that he's had, obviously, for this football team. I mean, it goes without saying how big of a deal it's been for having Jaden Daniels. His ability to keep him in every game. I mean, this is a crazy season for the Commanders, like 5 straight games where they basically win on the last play of each game. That is an amazing streak. I mean, you hit the upright in Tampa Bay and it still goes through. Devastating for Buccaneer fans, you know, euphoria for, you know, Commander fans, you know, 20 years basically since they've won a postseason game. It speaks to why the Dallas Cowboys did so well under Dan Quinn. It speaks to why, you know, he was a head coach in the National Football League before. He learned a lot during that situation. And I think he's met a lot of coaches along the way. So now he's able to put together a staff maybe that he's a little bit more knowledgeable with or working through. And again, nothing against his Atlanta staff from before, but here's a chance for you to kind of reset everything and think about like what didn't go right the way you thought it would. Because it's hard not to think that way as a head coach. And what would you do different to get that shot again? And he did. But the most important piece of the puzzle was they ran into the draft at the right time with the need at the right spot with the right player. And all that stuff combined puts you in this situation where you've got that many wins in your rookie season as a head coach. And exciting news for the Commanders. I wish I had more good feelings coming your way, Commanders, but you have a tough game this weekend against Detroit. I think everybody knows it, but you have a chance to play it. And you get to be there and you get to see and knock the big boys down.
The great point about Quinn coming over from Dallas, bringing Joe Witt Jr. with him. So, like, they get elevated, and Joe's technically the DC, but Dan's really still the architect of that defense. Campbell on the other side. You mentioned the Lions. It looks like they're getting healthier. David Montgomery was a full participant this week. Terrion Arnold back at corner. Kevin Zeitler, I have to wait on him. It looks like he was listed as out for practice, so we don't know about that. That's key on the offensive line at guard there. But when you look at Campbell and when you look at those coordinators I referred to there, he's still coaching those coordinators too. Like, what is the imprint that Dan Campbell has? Is it just I'm the final overseer when it comes to fourth down? I'm going to tell you when we're going for it, when we're not. And if something goes wrong, you have to answer to me. I mean, we all know who the top dog is in Detroit, even if he's not necessarily calling defense or offensive plays.
Yeah, you walk into this game and you're like, which team is not going to go for it on fourth down, right? I mean, last week, Dan Quinn, like, we're going for it on fourth down all the time. And Dan Campbell's like, we did it the most of anybody's ever done it before last year, or darn close to it if it wasn't them. And so this is kind of an interesting game to watch how fourth down plays out throughout this entire game. But, you know, Coach Campbell, I mean, again, you know, the wisdom he got to just be a head coach for a little bit and what you brought. I mean, I think that's what's cool about this game, that, you know, you get the second opportunity. You've got a really good front office. You know, I think that, you know, what Brad Holmes has done there with that roster has been really impressive with the help of the coaching staff and the front office to be able to put this team together and make big decisions like, okay, I'm going to go get Jared Goff, who I was with in LA, and bring him out to Detroit. And then I'm going to go draft Jack Campbell and Sam Laporta, and I'm going to go draft, you know, all these different really good players that are really impactful across the board. Lee McNeil, I know he's not there anymore, but you got to take Aiden Hutchinson, another guy that's not there. But I mean, you can go through this roster for a while now and sit there and go, wow, look at the impact it's had. But I think Coach Campbell, he said you're going to bite the kneecaps. You fit into the Detroit toughness kind of mentality, and the players bought in. And then the moves they made seem logical. There's not a lot of players that are leaving Detroit well, he was such a great player and now he's being a great player somewhere else. They're developing players and growing them. And I think that's a really great sign, like we talked about earlier in the podcast. You got to feel like you're becoming a better player in the positional room, or you're a better player offensively or a better player on the team. And they do that really well. And that's why Aaron Glenn and obviously Ben Johnson are guys that people have commodities towards, because look at the development of the players. And if you see good development of players, you're like, that's coming from coaching. Yeah, it's also coming from player talent, but it's also coming from coaching.
Yeah, Brad Holmes, the job he's done there as a GM with Dan Campbell as a head coach, they have completely turned this franchise around. It's like if it's the old game of Battleship, hit. They're hitting on all these picks. It's turning the fortunes of this franchise around. Is there any concern, though, that the Commanders are the happy-go-lucky? I know that they say they're not just happy to be there. They feel like, hey, what better time than the present? You never know how long these windows stay open. It's clearly open with Jaden Daniels. Is there any fear from the Detroit side of man, these guys are playing with nothing to lose? That used to be us 2-3 years ago. Now that's them.
I think the fear is they may be more aggressive than you expect, right? They realize that, they're playing with house money right now, and they're like, hey, let's go find a way to steal a win out of Detroit. Maybe that means a fake punt. Maybe it means a fake field goal. Maybe it means a random, I don't know about an onside kick, but, maybe it's, certainly going for it on fourth down or something like that. No. I think you got to steal.
You can't do that anymore because you have to announce the onside kicks for the dumbest rule change in the history.
You still could do it. You still could do it. You could still do something where you're like, oh, let's go try something completely random and see if it works because we need to do that. I don't know. But you know what? I think, and you're right, it is the dumbest rule, but it ruins the whole concept of it. But
we have to announce.
I think, yeah. But I think when you, I think it's kind of funny, you use Battleship against the Commanders, which is interesting because Dan Campbell will be like, got you. And you got, Coach Quinn over there, you sunk my Battleship. We'll see how this plays out with the Commanders. But it does feel like a game where I feel like, I talked earlier about Chiefs and Houston, how I felt like that game could be tighter. Look, I think the Commanders have had a great season. I feel like that win, the way they won against Tampa, felt like, not just a playoff win, but like the proverbial monkey off your back, or almost like their quick early Super Bowl. And this is the Detroit team from in 2 years from now. They'll maybe be different, but it's a lot of W's. And it's been a lot of wow, we won another one. And I don't know. I just feel like this game kind of gets pulled apart, where I think Detroit kind of runs away with this a little bit more. Nothing again against the Commanders and their opportunity they have, because it's real. But I just feel like Detroit's going to be primed and ready, because I think Coach Campbell has done such a good job of talking about not just the regular season, but he's been talking about the postseason the entire year, and the players have bought into it, and they're there, right? So they're trying to get to that 20-game season. And they're one step closer, coming this weekend.
Let's see the old 90s Canon commercials with Andre Agassi, right? Image is everything, right? I feel like the image of Jared Goff, if it's changed, it's because he's earned it. I feel like, Sean McVay, say whatever you want. When you make that move, you're basically saying you're not good. I mean, he said it. You're like, we just felt like we had to upgrade at the position to win a Super Bowl. They did that. I mean, that happened with Matthew Stafford. So it's not an indictment on McVay. But that had to hurt if you're Jared Goff to hear that kind of out there. Why is it clicked with Ben Johnson? Because it can't just be Ben Johnson. You got to be able to implement what Ben Johnson wants to do offensively. Why does it work so well for Jared Goff, kind of 2.0 version of him?
Well, I think number one, Detroit's invested in the offensive line, and they've invested wisely. They've done a good job in terms of protecting him, giving him a little more time. St. Brown, Williams, Laporta, Gibbs, Montgomery, walk around the National Football League and ask other quarterbacks if you could have that locker room in terms of skill set and the offensive line in front of you, how he would trade. There's a lot of guys that would trade for that group. And so they have done a good job of putting players around the quarterback. But Jared Goff has also done a good job of being smart with the football, limiting the turnovers that you felt like he had a little bit too much at the Rams, And sometimes, when you get let go and you get moved out, that can really spark a real fire and a real compassion towards, like, I'm going to show them they're wrong. A lot of players want to believe that, but maybe they just don't have quite it. Jared Goff has shown that, like, he's got it. I'll never forget, right? Being there last year at the draft and covering the draft for SiriusXM and getting ready to start the first round. And out of nowhere, the crowd starts chanting, and they're chanting Jared Goff. And I'm like, who would have ever believed they'd be chanting Jared Goff in Detroit 5 years ago? Like, there's just no way but he has done that. He's won over the team, he's won over the town, and he's just been consistent. Is there bad games in between? Sure there are. Everybody has a rough patch or a rough game, but he's been Mr. Consistent and, been able to be there week in and week out. And that's, the important part. But it's fun to watch the weapons that he has and the way he kind of works through it. But Ben Johnson does a great job of making sure that everybody understands the protection, everybody understands where the ball can go to, and Jared's just, running through the progressions and making the right throws.
Yeah, it's kind of, look, I was critical of him back in his LA days early on. I used to call him the arm surrogate of one Sean McVay, right? Like, he's not really thinking for himself. He's programmed like a computer to do what he's told. If you're good enough to compute that information from a Sean McVay and now from a Ben Johnson, then you're doing your job. And that's exactly what Jared Goff is doing. And when I hear you say that, Mark, about limiting turnovers, it used to be, a dirty phrase, if you will, game manager. And he's not just a game manager. He's an elevator too. But you do have to, every good quarterback is a game manager, right? Why did that become such a negative connotation with quarterbacks?
I agree with you. There's nothing negative about being a game manager. I mean, you are on a 4-minute offense to win the game. You better be a good game manager. Like, you have to be you've got a 2-minute drill and you're trying to get to field goal range to, put the game in overtime. You better be a good game manager. There's no such thing. Like, people used to say when we won our first Super Bowl in Tampa, like, Brad Johnson, good game manager. Sure, he was also ultra tough, took shots after shot, got back up, brushed it off and said, all right, let's go to the next snap. Like, Brad Johnson was a mule, right? He was so physically strong that he fought through it. And you can call him a game manager, but he also had to make elite throws at elite times to our players to make sure that we continue to win. So, I think
you're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
One more game to break down here in the divisional round of the NFC playoffs, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Dave Ross alongside Mark Dominik. And Mark, let's get to that game in the city of brotherly shove. Philadelphia, solid favorites, by 6-point favorites here against the LA Rams. I didn't feel like the Rams had to do too much to beat Minnesota. They kind of punched them in the face early, got that early KO, and I felt like Minnesota never got off the deck. They're going to have to play even better if they're going to go into Philly and get this win. Cold weather, dome team, Matty Stafford, all his years in Detroit in a dome. Now he continues that in LA. Is that problem number one, or is this team tougher than we think and equipped to go on the road and beat the Eagles?
Well, I think the one thing they showed me in this game last week was that they were resilient. Like, they were able to get through the LA fires, get through the situation, change the venue, turn around, and just play very good football across the board. And, I mean, I talked about that beforehand, like getting to the quarterback. Well, I think they got to the quarterback. I think Sam Darnold just took his 12th sack like 2 minutes ago. I mean, it was incredible what they did defensively. I thought that was so impressive to be able to get that many sacks and make Sam Darnold want to hold on to the football because Sam didn't want to make mistakes. I think he said take that same mentality. And the other thing I think about the Rams, or it's very good, is, defensively and really across the board except for the quarterback, it's a pretty darn young team still. Like, so you don't know what you don't know. And at the same point, you've got a lot of momentum built off that last week's game. Like, be careful, we're going to come get you. We can get to the quarterback while we play the run. We're athletic enough to do that. We're young enough to do that. And we're going to sprint around and show hustle and everything. So I think that's really encouraging. The big thing here for me for the Rams is, what we saw is how can you limit Saquon Barkley's effectiveness? And I think the big thing for the Rams is going to be chunk plays. Do they come or do they stop them? And if they can stop the chunk plays, the 45-yard run by Saquon because he cut back and made a good move, or the big pass play down the field to A.J. Brown, or any of those kind of things, can they do that and keep this game in that kind of mindset? That's got to be what they're thinking. but they've got to get to Jalen Hurts, right? And to kind of limit what he can do from a run perspective and not let them be two-headed just like we see the Baltimore Ravens are. So I think this is a really good matchup. I think the Rams can keep this game why it's kind of sitting where it is because, again, a young team getting to the quarterback with playmakers. I mean, Cooper Kupp was not a big factor, right? And so the Rams still felt like they were pulling away. They run the ball well, the Rams do. And so it's a good matchup here. And, if I'm leaning obviously towards Philadelphia. You play at home. Rams went to Arizona, come back. Now they got to repack up, go out to Philly, come back, deal with all those different things. That's a lot for a young team. But, the Eagles feel like they've just been playing so good, so consistent. And, I just don't know if there is an answer for Saquon Barkley and what his mindset is in terms of getting this team to the NFC Championship.
X or Twitter can be a hellscape, that's for sure. But I did see one funny tweet this week where somebody said, come on, let's be honest. Everybody wants to see Philadelphia and Detroit in the title game. And somebody just responded, nobody wants to see Jalen Hurts throw for 112 yards. Like, where is Jalen Hurts in this passing game? Because you mentioned it, Saquon. Can Jalen still go out there and be the guy that looked like an MVP just a couple of years ago? And now to that kind of that tweet, it's like, man, he just doesn't throw for a ton of stuff anymore. A.J. Brown's reading books in the sidelines. Are they really worried that if the game gets put in his hands that he can't deliver?
I don't think they are. I think that, you can still have him deliver underneath. You can still have him deliver, with A.J. Brown on a short route where A.J. Brown uses his legs to run after the catch. I mean, that's a big piece of the puzzle here. You can still go vertical if you want to also. So I feel better about Jalen Hurts maybe than I thought I would. When he went down, I'm like, okay, no big deal for the Eagles, but it felt like a bigger deal when you just watched their offense not feel quite as same, not feel quite as sharp. And so I think that, they feel confident that like, if they're down 10 points, 14 points, I think that you still can put some weight on that shoulder of Jalen Hurts, and I think he can take you down the field and get you back into a one-score game. I feel comfortable he can do that. I don't think it's, he's going to throw for 150 yards and that's all he can do anymore. I think that seems a little insulting for what he's done, I think, this year. And the way that, look, if you're going to have a running back run for 2,000 yards, I don't need my quarterback to throw for 5,000, 4,000 yards. I don't need that because I'm turning around and handing the ball off to the running back, and I'm going to use my legs too. So, statistically, it may not be pretty, but I've also got a 2,000-yard back that I'm not about to turn my back on in the postseason. Like, he's going to get his touches. And if that means Jalen Hurts has to go back there and not run the ball, or not throw the ball, I'm okay with that because this is how we got here. So I don't see anything really changing there. But I think if you get down, do I sit there and say Jalen Hurts can't bring you back? I don't believe that. I think he can. He's done that before. He's done that in college. I think he can do that now.
I mean, he was so good in that Super Bowl loss to the Chiefs. We remember that. I know everybody remembers the fumble and all that. He accounted for over 400 yards of offense with his legs and with his arm. I mean, the guy, he could still do it on the biggest stage. We saw it. He actually did do it. We talk a lot about coaching in this edition of the GM Shuffle. When you look at Nick Sirianni and then you look at Sean McVay, I mean, everybody's going to go check mark McVay. But then you look at the assistants, and Kellen Moore might be up for the Dallas job. We don't know if he'll get that or not, but then Vic Fangio, a guy who used to be a head coach in this league as well. Is it as simple as going McVay over Sirianni, or do we have to give Sirianni and Harry Roseman credit for the assistants that they brought in to kind of shore up the coaching staff?
If I know Sean McVay, he's watched just about every game that Fangio has coordinated in his life, right? And Sean's like one of those like grind, but also as a head coach, the whole thing. I mean, I'm sure he's really kind of got a nice little Rolodex because, again, Sean McVay, happened to come through Tampa basically as a GA. And you're like, hey, Coach Gruden, you want some coffee? And Coach is like, sure. Then leave me alone, right? And Sean be like, can I do any cut-ups for you? It was awesome, right? And it was an amazing time in Tampa when we had, Kyle Shanahan walking around and Sean McVay walking around, and you never thought fast forward like, okay, wow, look at what they've been able to do. I bring that up because Gruden had a great volume of libraries of tape, like unbelievable. Like he would always like stack this play onto this reel or this player, this coach is like this coach, and stack the I can see Sean McVay really like, I already know my favorite calls against Vic Fangio and this defense. Wow. I got a feeling he's already built that repertoire of like, here's how I would attack this defense. And let me just continue to watch the games this year to see if that same kind of mentality is still working for how I've kind of built up my mental Rolodex and also my tape log of what it would be. So, again, now everything's in the computer, but I can remember walking into Coach Gruden's office in Tampa and there's like a wall of just like yellow beta cam tapes just all over the place, all labeled. And it's like this, a brilliant mind of football plays that he's just continued to add on to. So I love that about like Sean McVay going into this game, even though he's going against somebody as good as Vic and what he's been able to, Coach Fangio, I should say, and what he's been able to do for the Philadelphia Eagles. I think this makes this a great matchup for us to get to watch on Sunday to see exactly how these two teams play out. I think the way that the Rams win is, I think they've got to create, not just the turnover, because that's obviously like, oh yeah, create a turnover, you got a chance to win. I think the Rams have to get Kupp and Puka Nacua going. I think they both have to end this game with like 8 to 10 touches at a minimum. I think both receivers just going, and you're moving the ball down the field because you're changing field position as you're doing it. So again, I don't think you want to go in this game and say, let's go have this huge shootout. It could end up that way because both teams can score. But I think the Rams want to play this one a little bit more like, hey, we're going to get the passing game going against these Eagles. And as good as Cooper DeJean's been, as good as the Eagles have been on the back end and things like that, I just think that if I'm going there, I'm trying to get Cooper Kupp the ball 8 times, Puka Nacua probably 12 to 14 times, and see if I can break a couple big plays that turn into touchdowns. I think that's the way the Rams try to attack the Fangio.
I love those stories. I could listen to those all day. When you see those beautiful minds working at a very young age, you saw it, the infancy stages. And again, those guys you mentioned for the Eagles, they're still rookies. I mean, I know they've been really good. They're still rookies. It's still their first playoff game too. Matty Stafford, been there, done that. Certainly Cooper Kupp and now Puka Nacua. Before we say goodbye in this edition of the GM Shuffle, the Cowboys have an opening, which I didn't see coming. And then all of a sudden, bam, we saw what happened earlier in the week. You and I talked about it on VSiN, that, maybe it would be about length of contract. That seems to be what it is. There are NDAs that are signed, so we might never know why Mike McCarthy's not there, but he's not. He's not coming back. We're hearing Ed Werder report it, other credible sources, that Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, would be inclined to take the job if it was offered. For those that don't remember, Deion played for Jerry, won a Super Bowl with Jerry. I mean, they have a great affinity for each other. Could this work? Mark, is this something that sounds like the theater of the absurd? Could it actually be a reality?
Gosh, at the beginning of when this all went down, I thought absolutely not. And not because Coach Prime can't coach. I thought two things. Number one, for whatever it's worth, there's a reason why Jerry or Jimmy Johnson got moved out of there, because he didn't want the head coach to be bigger than, maybe what his situation was. And Coach Prime will be bigger than Jerry Jones. And does he like to handle that? And Coach Prime is absolutely open in terms of like being able to speak his mind, speak his thoughts, speak how he feels. But that wasn't even it. I think it was more to me because I really felt like Coach Prime was like, I'm going to coach my son. If I'm in the National Football League, I want to coach my son. Well, he just endorsed the Titans. I saw a recent moment where he's like endorsing, like, I'm good with the Titans, like no state taxes. I dig that place. It's a good spot for him, that kind of thing. So, I mean, he gave the endorsement for his son. And so do I see Coach Prime leaving Colorado, where he's tried to say, that's all you can say, right? You can't say anything but I'm all in, because then recruiting falls wayside and everything falls apart. And we see what's going on in North Carolina. Like everybody's trying to bombard North Carolina all the time right now. But I don't know if I could see Coach Prime sitting on the sidelines and going against his son, trying to beat his son in a football game, because of what I think his son means to him. And I think the respect his son has for his dad. So that to me is the whole piece where I'm like, Ed Warner, been around for 30 years. It's hard for me to ever say, well, Ed, maybe he got led a little bit of a sauce or something like that. But I'm going to believe this one when I see it. I'm not going to give it legs like I think this could happen because of those two things. Where I just think Coach Prime really wants to coach his son, or just wants to coach in college. I just don't know if he wants to coach against his son, because that's obviously what would happen if he goes to Dallas.
I mean, I shouldn't ask you this question with 30 seconds to go on the show, but I did my wish list on X, and for first-timers, it was Ben Johnson, it was Deion Sanders. For retreads, as we said, my number one guy was Jimmy Johnson. Could JJ, I mean, you're never too old to coach football. Could he come back with Jerry and run it back one more time, make it the 90s all over again?
Yeah, JJ and Pete Carroll running on the sideline, coaching the defense, and, we got, it would be there's no. It would be amazing. Wouldn't that be great drama if I've got a good story we'll share about Jimmy Johnson back in my Tampa days. You'll love to hear the next Jim Show. bring that up.
That sounds like a tease, America. I can't wait to hear that story. And yes, that's wishful thinking on my part that Jimmy Johnson would come off his boat with Jerry Jones. That's probably not happening. Mark, great stuff as always, my friend. Appreciate your time. Thanks, everybody, for listening to the GM Shuffle.